And from the national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. I want to start the show tonight with the story of Hiroo Onoda. If you don't know the story of Hiroo Onoda, you are in for a real treat, because this is one of the world's most amazing stories. You'll be telling your friends about this tomorrow, okay? Onoda was a Japanese soldier fighting in the Philippines against the United States and the Allies. But when the war ended, nobody told Onoda, so he stayed there. He was hiding in like this jungle in this tiny little remote island just off the coast of the Philippines. As far as he could figure, the war was still going on. He stayed there, get this, for 29 years. And he was kind of dangerous because he thought the war was still going on. So when people came to try and tell him it was over, he felt threatened, and he was threatening to shoot people who came near him. You know how they finally got this guy to give up? You know, 29 years later, how they got him to give up? They flew in his aging former commander from Japan, flew him into the Philippines, took him there, and he ordered him to surrender. This is one of my favorite all-time stories. One of my favorite all-time stories. I mean, Hiroo Onoda. But guess what? Mr. Onoda's story is not the only unsettled issue from World War II. There's another one. Did you know that Russia and Japan are officially still at war? World War II-wise. It's not like they're shooting at each other or anything like that, but they never have that treaty signed. That's right. The two countries have never actually signed a peace treaty officially ending the war, World War II. And it's because of a set of islands right in between the two countries that this is such a huge dispute. So today, Presidents Putin of Russia and Abe of Japan, they came together again to try and see if they could end this really bizarre entanglement.
It is very pleasant that our meetings have become regular, which allows us to discuss issues related to the development of bilateral relations and the situation in the region.
Today I would like to discuss the issues of concluding a peace treaty, taking into account the results of the meeting between the foreign ministers and the meetings between negotiators last week. In addition, I look forward to a frank exchange of views on bilateral relations and international issues in order to develop bilateral ties in broad areas.
I mean, can you believe this? The president of Russia and the president of Japan meeting to come up with a peace treaty so that they can officially end World War II. Today. So where are these islands that are keeping these two major powers from ending World War II? And what is it about them that makes them so important? It is the story we will drill down on for you tonight, right here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we do believe, as you've come to know, that it's time to do news again. I want to explain to you first and foremost, though, this story about Russia and Japan officially still being at war. It's about this island chain, right? I'm going to show it to you. It's right here. It's this island chain that's right there. Island chain that stretches all the way from eastern Russia to northern Japan. It's right here. These are called, by the way, the Kuril Islands. The islands have been a source of dispute for centuries now, but the Japanese took control of them during the Second World War, as the Japanese Navy seemed to, well, take control of almost everything, every island in the Pacific. But when the war ended and Japan, the aggressor, lost, that's no small point, by the way, the Russians then claimed the islands as their own. You know that whole to the victor go the spoils thing, right? Well, since then, the 20,000 or so residents who live on these islands here, in fact, I'm going to show you something. Come over here. We've got that square a little larger here so you can see it. There's Russia and there's Japan, right? So it's all this chain of islands that you see right here. Most of the people who live there, some 20,000 as I mentioned, consider themselves Russian citizens. Most of them are Slavic. But even the Asian residents whose descendants are Japanese consider themselves Russian citizens as well. So if you ask the residents who live there, this is not that big a deal. But for reasons of oil, of power, of shipping lanes, of fishing rights, Japan, as you might expect, wants these islands back, or at least, if nothing else, they're trying to negotiate these small islands down here. See these right there? The ones that are right up butted against them, may be willing to give up some of these to Russia. They want the ones on the northern coast. Russia says no. Putin, for his part today, promised to at least try and come up with some kind of compromise. But not Sergei Lavrov, who is essentially the chief diplomat for Russia, sounding not so diplomatic, right? He's telling the Japanese, sorry, and this is a quote, but it's time to admit you lost the war. RT's Daniel Hawkins with more on this Russo-Japanese meetings.
A lot of talk on expanding trade, bilateral cooperation on various projects, from agriculture to nuclear technology, etc. The big one, of course, was that 1956 treaty between Japan and the Soviet Union at the time to decide the fate of the Kuril Islands, all claimed to be the northern territories by Japan. That dispute over the 4 islands just north of Japan and south of Russian Sakhalin. The big question was, can any headway, any major breakthroughs be made to do with that peace treaty? The answer was no. Mr. Putin did say the discussions were fruitful, a lot of ground was covered, but did say a lot of work remained to be had to come to some sort of conclusion.
We discussed the prospects for signing a peace treaty and gave much time to the question. We've been holding dialogue over the question for several years. We confirmed our interests in signing this treaty. We have much work to do to form the conditions for mutually accepted decisions. The aim is to provide the long-term and comprehensive development of Russia-Japan relations.
Nothing concrete really came out of that press conference today. Not that expectations were particularly high. Negotiations have been going on there, as the Russian president said, for some years, but really dating all the way back to the post-Second World War period. He did say that the door was open, though, to further discussions, leaving aside the rhetoric that's been flying around before these negotiations, to come to some sort of arrangement in the future. It looks like those negotiations will be ongoing before anything concrete is undertaken.
We thank our correspondent for that report. We're joined now by John Jordan, former Naval Intel officer. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us on. This is a fascinating story that most people don't really know about. And, you know, as I look at this, I'm thinking to myself, why don't the Russians just go ahead and do what would seem like the decent thing and give up at least some of those small islands on the north coast of Japan and call it a day? No? You think Putin will do that?
Well, I don't think Putin's going to give them away. To this day, the people that live on those islands do consider themselves Russians. At the end of the war, the Russian occupation removed all of the Japanese citizens, about 17,000 from those islands, in 1945. Now the people that live there are largely of Russian descent and consider themselves Russian. Interestingly enough here, you know, Japan has never really confronted its responsibility and the atrocities it committed in World War II. This is in contrast to the Germans, who really owned up to their responsibility and still, to this day, are trying to make amends for it. Japan, not so much. Japan doesn't really see itself as being very responsible, and this is even how history is taught in Japanese schoolrooms. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds.
What's the history in situations like this? I mean, I'm thinking about my own country, and I know that, you know, being from Cuba, I know what happened after the Spanish-American War. I know there's cases like Guam. The United States has always had a tendency not to take the entire island or the entire country, but to keep a little piece of territory to put it bases, right? So what's the history in situations like this between countries, including our own?
Well, as you point out, America has always just kept bases or insisted on basing rights, and largely after World War II, the Cold War ensued, so it made some sense. And the host countries were happy to actually have them there. In this case, those islands are actually Russian war booty. A little-known footnote from the end of World War II is, you know, the Russians came in about a week before the end and routed the Japanese army in Manchuria. And then when Japan surrendered, the Russians actually went to General MacArthur, who was commander-in-chief for the occupation army, and told them that they were planned on having occupation rights on the northern island of Hokkaido, the northern main Japanese home island. General MacArthur promptly told the Russians that the American troops would resist them there, but the Russians did try to divide Japan like they did Germany.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.